Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Ryan Heckman, the CEO of Rallyday Partners, and this is the Founder's Journey podcast. We'll explore the heart and soul of great founders and their journey to build the company of their dreams. You will learn about new industries and business models while discovering how to apply the founder's mindset to your everyday work and life. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Founder's Journey podcast. I'm Ryan Heckman, your host, and I am joined today by Susan Salgado. Susan was 15 years with Danny Meyer, helping him set the table, so to speak, and turning his cultural instincts into systematic advantage and beauty, I would say, in the hospitality sector. I met Susan like I meet a lot of folks. We were at a conference together. Susan was speaking to a couple hundred HR leaders, and I just couldn't help myself and went and introduced myself and Rallyday to Susan. And we're always trying to find folks to help us help our leaders grow professionally and personally. Susan's journey is notable for a variety of reasons, but we're hoping that we can plug Susan into some of our portfolio companies to help them make and create more people-centered cultures across a variety of industries. So early days of my friendship with Susan, but just couldn't help but to think, what if we were able to get Susan to agree to be on our podcast? And what could that mean to our listeners and other founders trying to do impossible things through people? So this is going to be a treat. I was actually up this morning at 5 a.m. I attribute that certainly in part to my anticipation and excitement to get to spend some time with you, Susan. So thank you for joining us.
Ryan, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. It's been such a joy to get to know you and your company. You have a fantastic team. Everyone I've met so far has been amazing. And we definitely sing from the same songbook. So it's great meeting such like-minded people.
Yeah, well, it's funny because somebody gave me Danny's book probably 2 or 3 years ago, and it's just been sitting there, not because I wasn't intrigued. I heard Danny on at least 2 podcasts, and he's an amazing speaker and storyteller more broadly, and is so genuine and thoughtful. Just like crazy good. But it was more just that, it's hard to read a book. And so this interview forced me to read Setting the Table. Is it called Setting the Table? Remind me.
Yes, it is. Yep.
Short title.
Yep. The Transforming Power of Hospitality.
It was very good. And it was shorter than I expected, by the way. So for any of you all out there that might be intimidated otherwise to start a book, this one you can start and finish pretty quickly. And it's written in a way, it's very plain spoken and just a super easy.
A lot of stories, which are always fun to read. He also read the book himself for the audio version. So I always like when the author reads their own book. I think that's a nice way to listen to a book if you enjoy listening.
Well, why don't we start? If you were going to write the second book for Danny, what would the title of your book be in service to his vision?
Well, I'll tell you, I am writing the book. I'm writing a proposal right now for our book. And the working title that we have right now is Nothing Bigger Than the Little Things.
Ooh.
Right? It's really the little things that we do in our businesses that create the feelings that drive the behaviors that make people either want to be there or not want to be there. And when I was being interviewed at one point in time, someone kept asking me questions and every answer started with, well, there are a million things I could tell you here. It just made me realize that that's what this is all about, right? It is all about the little things that we do. And culture sounds like such a big topic, but when you break it down, it's every interaction that we have every day that drives culture.
That is a great title of a book. Certainly all of us listeners here will give you permission to change it if it evolves.
Thank you. We'll see what the editors say, right? Yeah. They get the final say.
It's a hell of a punchy title.
Thanks.
Well, why don't we I thought maybe we could split this podcast into 2 parts. One, kind of your biographical story, your arc, and even beginning when you were a kid, if that's helpful. And then the other half, I think it would be great for us to double click on culture. It is a word that certainly in private equity, very few private equity folks understand what that word means. But I think more generally, it is an off-used and off-misinterpreted discipline of business. And you guys have done such a cool and great job of bringing that to life, as you say, both technically and with stories, that I think it'd be fun if we spent a fair amount of time on just what culture is and what it isn't, and how to operationalize it as you did with Danny for those 15 years.
Well, thank you.
Building his empire. So tell me about Susan. Where did you begin, and when did you get a spark, and then how did that get you to getting a PhD in organizational development?
Yeah, it's all tied together. I could start at the chronologically, or I can start with the spark. It's the story is all the same. I guess I would say the easiest place to start is with meeting Danny Meyer. And I met Danny when I was already a graduate student at NYU, Stern School of Business. And I was doing a PhD in organizational behavior, which is essentially like organizational psychology, but it's in the business school instead of in the arts college. And I had been going to Danny's restaurants with my boyfriend, now my husband, who would take me into New York City on Saturdays, and we would have dinner at the bar at Union Square Cafe, big part of our courtship, and then go back to Pennsylvania again, where we were living. And I was always fascinated by the genuine, authentic caring of all of the people who worked at Union Square Cafe. It's why it became our favorite. It wasn't about, the best food or the best rankings or anything. It was about the way they made us feel. And we were kids at the time. We were in our early 20s. And, you're from Pennsylvania and you go into New York City and it's this big city. And they would always make us feel like we were somebody. Like they recognized us or at least pretended to. And we had these amazing experiences. And the more I got to know about Danny, the more I realized that he was creating a remarkable workplace where people loved to be. They loved their jobs. They loved the product. They were proud of what they did. And that was driving these very behaviors that I was experiencing. And when I reflect back on that, in fact, when I first told my parents about it over dinner one night, when I went back to Pennsylvania to visit them, I said to my father, almost trying to convince him, Dad, he's just like you. Because my father started his own company when he was 40 years old. He was a mechanical engineer and had worked at a number of different organizations doing electroplating, putting coatings on products so that not for cosmetics, like, your gold-plated watch, but rather for conducting electricity for better performance. And so he had really started to understand semiconductors. This is back in the late 60s, and to understand how big that industry was going to be. And he decided to start his own company with plating semiconductors. And so I won't pretend to know all of the technical stuff behind this, but what I do know is that, he took a huge step. He was when you talk about a founder's story, this was something he really believed he could do. And he tells the story about going home to my mom and saying, if I do this, I have to quit my job and we could lose the house, we could lose everything. And she said, Charlie, you've got to do it. And so he started this company. And in building his team for this company, he created a remarkable place to work. For these blue-collar workers, he offered full healthcare benefits and, paid vacation. And he had a 4-day work week back in the 70s, partly because it was more efficient for the production process, but also he enjoyed it. Like everyone enjoyed having a 4-day work week. And he treated his employees like they were family. He took care of everyone. He knew their names, their kids' names. There was a Christmas party every year and everybody brought their families, and my mother sent everyone handwritten Christmas cards. Like it really was a family production. And as that got bigger and bigger, that endured. The taking care of your people first endured. And when I met Danny and got to know more about what he was doing at Union Square Cafe, this beloved restaurant of ours, I found out the exact same thing. In an industry where people are often seen as dispensable, or they are so transient because they're actors and musicians and, they're just in and out of these jobs, he had a team of lifers. They had been with him for the 7-8 years that the restaurant was already open. They had no intention of going anywhere because they loved where they worked. They loved the people they worked with. They felt valued and respected. They had great benefits, and that was where they wanted to be. And the reason I had gotten into this was because, Ryan, there's a very long story that goes behind all of this, but the short side of it is when I was an undergrad, I had become involved in the culture of my university. I went to Lehigh University. I started in engineering. And at the time that I joined, Lehigh had only been co-ed for about 15 years. It had previously been an all-male school. And the year that I was a freshman, they started a council called the Council on Women and Minorities in an attempt to investigate the climate of the university and figure out how to make it a more inclusive and caring and open community.
At that time, how many male versus female students do
It
you
was,
figure?
at that time, it was 30% female.
Okay. Early days to
Yes.
getting to
Yes,
30.
exactly. Yep. And so getting involved in that at the university really opened my eyes to the importance of building relationships in organizations and how much it matters how you feel being part of an organization. And it didn't really matter if that came from the student perspective of my own pride of being part of this school or my own discomfort in a classroom, like those feelings, as well as the feelings of everyone who worked there, from the administration to the faculty to the graduate students, that there needed to be a unity in how people perceived the mission of the university, the climate that they wanted to create. And at that time, having gone through this huge transition, it was not a shared understanding of what they were trying to create. And so as an undergrad, I got to be part of that, which was incredibly exciting. It also is what set me on my path, because going forward from that point, everything that I had to do had something to do with building a more inclusive workplace, fostering stronger relationships, building mutual care and respect among people. So that has just been the evolution for me that ultimately led me to wanting to study Danny Meyer's restaurants for my dissertation research and getting involved with his organization. I had intended to become a professor and go on and teach students how to do this stuff, but I fell in love with the company and the ethos that he had and knew that that was just where I belonged. And so I ended up spending the next 15 years there. But as part of that, we opened an organization called Hospitality Quotient, which is the consulting arm of Union Square Hospitality Group, his restaurant group. And we took all of the best practices that I had articulated in my research of what he was doing to create this remarkable culture, create a great workplace where people were thriving, take all of those best practices and the leadership programs that we had developed internally and turn that outward so we could help organizations in other industries. And we started in healthcare. And from there went on to government services and then into education and retail, and then got into luxury brands. And so over the course of the next 15 years, we touched more than 20 different industries, helping people to create thriving workplaces where they would give their best, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And that's really what I'm most passionate about. I think it makes the world a better place if we can create better workplaces.
There is so much to unpack there. Why don't we start with what Hospitality Quotient is? Fresh off reading the book that Danny wrote, there's IQ, EQ, and what he's invented, HQ. Tell me about HQ.
Sure. Well, I think the notion really started with in the late 1996 was the first year that Union Square Cafe won the award for being the most popular restaurant in New York City in the Zagat Guide. And if you remember, in 1996, it was a book, not a website, right? So you actually couldn't wait for it to come out, and you ran to the bookstore and you bought this little red book to see who had the most favorite restaurants. And Gramercy Tavern at that time was number 3, his second restaurant. And when you looked at the scores for these two restaurants, neither one of them had the top score for food. Neither one of them had the top score for service. And neither one of them had the top score for ambiance. It was nowhere close. They weren't even in the top 10. And so you look at this and you say, they're not in the top 10 for any of these 3 markers. And yet they're the most popular number 1 and number 3. How could that possibly be? And what Danny realized at that time is it was how we were making people feel. And that's what hospitality is all about. Hospitality is all about how the person on the other side of the interaction feels with the way you treat them and the actions that you take, either to serve them or not. And so taking that same ideology to a person, you have a person's technical skills that are all of the things that they do to get a job done. And you have emotional intelligence, but how well they are able to empathize with others and provide genuine, caring hospitality to someone, not based on what they want, but what the other person wants, being able to read them and anticipate that. That's what Hospitality Quotient is all about.
Is that what he refers to as the 51% rule? Is that
It
a
is.
similar concept? Or
It is. It's a very similar concept because he said just breaking down the technical and emotional components of a job, if you had a test that had 100 points on it and you knew everything technical on that test, you could only get 49 points on the test. The other 51 would come from having all of the emotional intelligence, the empathy, the caring. And so that 51% breakdown says it's almost equal, right? It's almost a 50-50 split. But the 1% extra goes to that emotional side because it's really, really hard to teach people to care. It's really hard to teach people genuine hospitality and wanting to take care of someone else if they don't have that inside of them. I have found over the years that if someone has even the smallest seed of it, you can make that grow. You can develop that in people. But there are I think it's a very small minority of people who just don't have that. They don't want to care. You're never going to break through that. And so those are people I would say should never be in any kind of a customer facing interaction. It's just not going to be for them. But that emotional intelligence and the ability to know and understand how to deliver hospitality is what he wanted to focus on in his hiring. You can teach the other stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we all know what IQ is, and we're getting, I think, better at understanding what EQ is. And there's a lot of measurements for that today that maybe didn't even exist 20, 30 years ago. This HQ thing to me seems like it's a measure of the desire to make people's lives better, maybe more than it is an understanding of necessarily how to do it, because the environments in which you're operating are so variable that it would be hard to teach someone to respond to every single very unique circumstance that the general public maybe doesn't even know how to express that they want in an experience. Yeah. Tell me about how you measure people's desire to make other people's lives better, and what are the core markers of that by your estimation?
So we never tried to measure it. We were approached a number of times by firms who said, we can help you measure it. And we never did it because from our experience, you know it when you feel it. And it's really hard to put that into some kind of a metric. I will tell you that empathy is the backbone of hospitality quotient. You cannot provide hospitality to someone else if you can't put yourself in their shoes and imagine how they feel. And just try to think about what you would want if you were in their shoes, or even better, read them to see what they're telling you, either non-verbally or verbally, understand what it is that they really want. And a very simple example of how this mindset works is if you think about someone who comes into a restaurant and they're not accustomed to going into fine dining restaurants. And here maybe they're from out of town and they come into New York City, which can be intimidating enough, and they walk into a restaurant that is one of the top restaurants, and they feel even more intimidated. Recognizing that in someone and being able to empathize and say, I know what it feels like to be in over your head sometimes. How do I make that person feel comfortable? What can I say? How can I welcome them in a way that will make them know that they're safe here, that they're okay? So wanting to provide that emotional safety to someone is part of what we're looking for. Being able to, you have to have the empathy to start. But there are other ways that this plays out in business. Like when I write service agreements for clients, I always try to think about it from the client side. How do I take this legal document and make it feel completely fair that any reasonable person reading it would say, that makes so much sense that you would ask for that, and that you would, that you should be willing to give to the other side. Or my husband said to me last night, he was logging into a website, and he said, why is it that European websites have the cookie thing where when you go in, they automatically opt you out? You have to opt in. And in the US, we have the automatic opt-in. You have to figure out how to turn it off. And that's true hospitality to me, is saying, we're not going to force this on you. We're not going to impose this on you. I won't have pop-up windows on my website because I think it imposes on people. And so when you can take the mindset of how do we make people feel with every one of these little tiny interactions, that's when you're providing true hospitality.
And when you met Danny, my recollection, was it in 1992? Does that sound about right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How did he know you had that inside of you? I mean, obviously fairly disarming to say, I'd like to do my dissertation on your company.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually that became him handing you the keys to probably the most valuable asset of the company, people and learning.
Mm-hmm.
And he's renowned for these provocative interview questions. How did he know that you were the right leader to help him maybe systematize or scale his approach to the extent that you did together?
Mm-hmm. So I'm sorry, I never finished the question before because I started with empathy as a key marker for this hospitality quotient. And that was one of the characteristics that he looked for. But when you read Setting the Table, he lists 5 characteristics that he thinks are most important. Empathy being one of them, self-awareness being another, curious intelligence, that you are not just smart and can learn things, but that you're curious about the world and always wanting to learn more, and a warm and friendly character. So he has this list of things that he wants to see in the the 5th one, a strong work ethic. And each one of those goes to who you are as a person. Are you empathetic? Are you a hard worker? And well, it's not even a hard worker, is it? It's having a good work ethic, which is more of a mindset. And each one of them is about a mindset of self-awareness. Do I get who I am? And can I modulate that in a way that I make myself easy for other people to be around, that I make myself a great team member, and that I also can be really approachable to a guest or change the way I behave in a way that makes a guest feel more comfortable. And so these 5 characteristics are what he was looking for. And as you said, there are a number of questions that we had suggested to our team members. These are the kinds of things you can ask to get at those emotional characteristics. It's probably one of the most common questions that I get is, how do I identify the cultural fit of someone, whether it's Danny's 5 things or another organization's definition of what they're looking for. And I'll tell you that since developing the list of questions, the thing that I have found is what matters more than anything is who you are as the interviewer in the room. Because if you're not a 51%er yourself, and you don't have that curious intelligence and that empathy and that intuition that you get from having that emotional intelligence, it's really hard to conduct a good interview. And if you don't prioritize interviewing, really prepare for it, understand what you're looking for, technically and emotionally, and also doing your homework to know who you're meeting with. I think we get so busy that I can remember being handed a resume and saying, hey, can you interview this person for me today? I'm like, okay, what's the job? What am I interviewing them for? And so we learned to be very specific about what we wanted people to interview for. Like, you don't need to know the technicalities of the job. I need you to assess their 51%. I need you to tell me if they've got the hospitality gene in them. And so knowing what I, as the interviewer, am looking for, and then in the interview, asking questions. I say almost any question you can ask, but really listening and pulling the thread to get at the depth of the answer, not just the first layer that people give you, but keep peeling the onion back to really understand the person. And the deeper you get into that, the harder it is for anyone to keep on a facade or give you their canned answers to questions. They have to be more and more honest, or they will shut down in a way that you will know they're never going to be vulnerable. You're never going to be able to build that kind of trust with them. They don't have the emotional intelligence to do the job.
Okay, well, I'm going to force a little bit on you right now.
All right.
My question around going from patron to dissertation to running people and learning for Danny's organization, was there ever an interview when he was like, yeah, we're good? Like, yeah, Susan, why don't you go scale this thing? Why don't you scale it at Shake Shack and build 500 units all over the world?
No.
Or what is it just something that you guys just crept into this partnership together? Like,
we crept into it. And it was the first person who said to me, you're a 51%er, was actually Danny's partner, Paul Bowles-Bevan, who at that time was the managing partner of Union Square Cafe and went on to become the first chief people officer for Union Square Hospitality Group. And Paul used that term, and I still hadn't heard it. You're a 51%er. That was the first time I heard it. So I didn't even know what I was being assessed for at the time. I had told Danny and Paul and his other partners, I had to kind of do a little shuttle diplomacy and try to get everyone on board with me doing this study. And what I had told them is that what I saw in their organization was a perfect example of how people can be a source of competitive advantage in an organization because of the culture that you create. But at this point in time, when we were having this conversation, it was actually 1998. And at that time, they had 4 restaurants. They just opened Tabla and 11 Madison Park. And culture was an academic term. It wasn't something that you talked about in the popular press. And so even they didn't fully understand what it was that I was looking at here. But with Danny's curious intelligence, he wanted to know more. So he dug in and said, yes, I want to learn more about this. Paul already had a sense of it. He was so passionate about the workplace that they created. And when I brought in this concept, culture, it was like I put a name to something that he had always known. And so he and I really became the first co-authors of the leadership programs. And I would pick Paul's brain to understand what did he do as the managing partner of Union Square Cafe that made him so effective at creating this culture. And then I did the same with Danny, and I did the same with Richard Corain, who was the chief operating officer at the time. And Michael Romano was the head of culinary and as the second chef at Union Square Cafe. Michael is one of those people who sits so quietly in a meeting and you don't even know sometimes if he's listening to you, and then he has the most brilliant remark, right? And to be a fly in the kitchen, watching him create culture in the kitchen was just fascinating. The way he treated his team in such unexpected ways that they had never been treated in any other kitchen, and the behaviors that brought out. And so I got a front row seat to what all of these guys were already doing. And my job was to codify it. How do I create a system for this and an architecture that says this is what we stand for, this is what we believe in, this is what we want to continue to create, so that when we first replicated a restaurant, which Danny never thought he would do, he was a purist, right? Like he wanted to be the restaurateur who was at their front door every night. But when Shake Shack was born, it was a clear concept for replicating. And it took 5 years before they replicated Shake Shack. But at that point in time, we had so well articulated the culture and the leadership qualities that went into building that kind of culture that we were able to kind of use that as a blueprint for how we would go forward in creating more Shake Shacks and more new restaurants.
The Shake Shack story is so awesome. The way it started philanthropically, and it was at Madison Park.
Madison Square Park. And at Madison Square Park, it was a hot dog cart. And the concept behind it was, number one, it was part of an art installation. So if anyone listening remembers when they had taxi cars up on huge stilts about 20, 25 feet above the ground. It was a fantastic art installation for I Love New York kind of vibe. And Danny created a hot dog cart for that to be part of the art installation. It's another amazing thing that he has done in his career is every community that he goes into gets better. So Madison Square Park was not a very nice park when he opened those two restaurants right across the street. It was more the kind of park you walked around rather than through. And as part of the community, he helped to bring in things like, the art installations. He worked with the Conservancy and created the hot dog cart for them, then used it very creatively as a training ground for young managers to figure out how to interact with the public. And so that hospitality came through on this hot dog cart. The lines were long. And then he was able to persuade the park that they should let him create a permanent structure that would benefit the park. So part of the proceeds went back to the park and allowed Shake Shack to be born. And in those early days, it was seasonal. So it would close down for the winter. And I truly believe that part of the mystique and the success of this restaurant came from that shutdown, because then in the spring, people would go on their blogs and, we're talking 15 years ago, so it wasn't social media, but they would be like, we saw activity at Shake Shack today. We think there's getting ready to start opening. And the Shake Shack watch. And they put in a camera at one point so you could see how long the line was at Shake Shack. So all of that evolved with social media and with the changes in the way we communicate. The timing was just perfect for all of it. And I think that it was a big part of how it became such a phenomenon, not to mention the fact that the food's pretty darn good.
It is addictively good. One of the standards that we talk about with culture is that if you build the right culture early, as the company gets bigger, it becomes culturally better. And a lot of organizations default to it getting worse. Are you pleased, Susan, with how the cultural architecture at Shake Shack has helped maintain or retain that heritage that you just so beautifully shared with us?
Oh, thank you. Well, I can't speak from the inside anymore, right? I've been out of the organization for 8 years now. And so I can't tell you if I know what's going on internally with Shake Shack to prove that, but I'll tell you that when you become a publicly traded company, your world changes, whether you want it to or not. And so I know that that is something that every organization that has the same ethos has to struggle with. It's one of the reasons I love beneficial organizations, getting the protection to be able to hold true to your beliefs. But what Danny and then Randy Garutti, the first CEO, did that I think really stood out was, if you read that prospectus from 2015, it's all about the culture. And from the very beginning, in 1992 was the first time Danny articulated his 5 key stakeholders. And the first was taking care of each other, not your people. It wasn't like the people are first, the employees are first. It was taking care of each other is first. And that is a significant difference from these other organizations that today have taken the same path, but they say it's the people first. And that can create a sense of entitlement among employees, like you are supposed to take care of me, without realizing the reciprocal nature of we all have to take care of each other in order for this business to thrive. And then second, his customers, the guests of the restaurant. Third, the community. Fourth, the suppliers. And fifth, the investors. And when you put the investors fifth, I remember hearing stories as a new employee way back when that, oh yeah, the investors had a hard time with that one. I don't know the ins and outs of that, but I can imagine they did. It was the way Danny sold this counterintuitive approach that allowed him to put the investors last, knowing that if he did the first 4 really well, the 5th one was going to take care of itself. And I think that same mentality went into Shake Shack in focusing on the culture and saying, this is what is going to differentiate us from every other organization out there that's trying to do the same thing, serve great food in a not so fast environment, creating hospitality and caring. So I think it's very much at the heart of everything that they do.
Yeah, we recently had an experience there maybe 2 weeks ago, and I had forgotten ketchup for my family where we had taken the meal, and my mom was there, and they were literally sitting around the table, and I'd gotten food for everybody, and I'd forgotten ketchup. And in my household growing up, ketchup was like what we ate, and we would bring in food as the garnish. So they were like, "What, Ryan? You forgot the ketchup? What the hell?" So I got back in the car, and I was like, "Do I go to Safeway or the grocery store to pick up the ketchup, or do I go back to the store?" I went back to the store, and there was a line out the door. It was a rush. It was probably a little bit later in the night, and I went around the line to one of the employees that was in charge of the beverage department, or serving beverages or whatever. And she saw the look on my face, and she said, "You look like you need some help. What can I do to help you?"
Isn't that nice? Perfect.
And she was having her own issues because, they had a line out the door, and she had the HQ to see that I was in my own little head and duress. And she saw it and not only responded, but put all the ketchups into a bag, folded it over, handed it to me as if she were handing me a meal. And so I think
awesome.
I'm sure that's not everywhere, but it was just impressive.
Yeah, well, that's the holy grail, right? It's the consistency.
No question.
And if you get the culture right, that's where the consistency comes in. But culture is always going to be driven by local leadership. And so whatever the ethos is of Shake Shack and whatever the CEO says, that's all very important. And if your local leader isn't living it, you're not going to see it. Whenever I go into an organization and I do an assessment of their culture, if they have toxicity, I find it comes from one of 3 places. The obvious one is you've got a jerk at the helm, right? Like somebody who's creating the toxic environment. And that's possible, but it's actually probably the most rare reason that I see this. The second reason I see is that you've got someone at the top who doesn't realize that's their job. They were promoted into a leadership role and they don't understand how they impact culture. They don't know what they're supposed to do. And so they're not holding people accountable to the culture, which means that the employees are behaving however the employees want to behave. And the problem with that is that becomes your culture. The behaviors then define the culture. So if they're allowed to be rude to each other, or snappy or backstab, then they do. And that is the new culture. The third thing that I find is that sometimes it's because the person is so nice, they don't want to hold anyone accountable. So they avoid all of the difficult conversations, and it has the same effect.
Your poor daughter became the subject of a story that you tell on the third point that I thought was so
She was
funny.
in the audience that day too.
Was she?
Yeah.
Well, tell it because it's a good one. So just to summarize, the three things that you find, do it for me again. So number one is the person at the top
The person's toxic.
is toxic, and so
Uh-huh.
would
Yeah.
you ever go into an engagement where you discovered that number one was the problem, or would you try to either rehabilitate that person or go around them? What would you do?
So I have been brought into those situations, and I got better and better over the years at vetting that so that I knew what I was getting into. And when I find that the person is the problem, before I would really take on the engagement, I would ask the question, what are you willing to do? Because if you are not willing to hold that person accountable, it's a very different path that we're going to take than if we have to work around them. And there are some places where there was one place that I worked with co-CEOs, and one was the most like drinking the Kool-Aid, the nicest guy and caring about employees. And the other one was all about the bottom line. And they, in fact, made a great CEO pair in the end, but there was nothing that you could do to make that guy want to create the culture except to show him how the culture impacted the results. And it happened that these two people were physicians. And the one who is the more disbelieving said to me, okay, so if this stuff works so well, tell me, what's one thing that I can do as a physician that will make my patient experience scores go up, which is the goal of the project. And I said, well, tell me about when you're visiting with the patient in the room, how do you end the appointment? And he said, well, I get up and I go to the door and I say, I'll probably ask them on the way out the door, like, is there anything else? And I got up myself, went to the door, put my hand on the door, and I said, like this? He was like, yeah. And I said, try not doing that. Try just sitting down, staying where you were, and ask the person, is there anything else? And pause. Count to 10 before you give up on them asking you a question. He said, that means they're going to ask more questions. I said, that's going to raise your patient experience scores. And so he tried it, and he found that his patient experience scores went up. So he wasn't going to try it because he believed in it. He was going to try it because he had an end goal. And that's another thing I have found is that it doesn't matter which one you've got going with your executives. If you can get them to buy in for either reason, because it's going to drive better results or because they know it's the right thing to do that's going to drive better results, either way, it works.
Great answer. Second one is that leaders don't understand that cultural architecture and cultural health is
part
of their job description,
Yeah.
Which I encounter a lot in private equity as recently as last week with one of my partners. And it's one of these funny things where we think our day jobs as individual contributors are to create value in private equity and to do these very technical things all the time. And to make that leap to taking responsibility for the mindset of other people in service to the mission is kind of a big leap. And what do you do to get through that one with your engagements?
So that starts with the education of you have to understand this is part of your job. I'm actually working with an organization right now that has had this habit of it was almost like tenure was what got you promoted. And so you'd have to be really bad at your job to get passed over if you were the next one who would logically get the job. And the place feels like a family. And it has many nice qualities of being like a family, but it also has all of the dysfunction that comes with that kind of a mindset. So what I discovered in talking with the CEO is he found me by hearing me at a conference, and he brought me in because he knows that culture is important, but he's one who just doesn't know what to do with it. Like, I don't know how to create this culture, and I don't know what we're doing that's either making a good culture or a bad culture. And his whole chief level team is the same. And so what I ended up doing with them is first defining what leadership means in their organization. When you say you want to have better leaders, what does that mean? And they started to articulate things like really listening to people and supporting them and understanding their growth plans and all of the things that are true leadership that are beyond an individual contributor or a manager who's making sure that the work gets done. That was what they were articulating. And I said, so this is going to be part of the foundation of your culture is we have to help your leaders at every level to understand this. And so they have a 4-layer organization, about 600 people. And we need to work at every level to help people understand that regardless of what your job is, part of it is creating a remarkable place to work and upholding the culture and the values that are most important in this organization.
And tailored to that level so that there's very specific action items for them to focus on. Yep. I love that. I mean, it's very simple. And by the way, the example I just gave you, this colleague and partner of mine has so much to offer culturally to this organization at Rallyday, but just maybe needed permission to know that like that was kind of part of the gig, you know. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing to me how many people fall in that second bucket. I think it has something to do with the fact that in most instances we become leaders, we're anointed leaders because we were awesome individual contributors.
Right. Exactly.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that we know what being a leader's job entails. So that education must be incredibly valuable for your clients. Tell us about sorry, if you want to elaborate on that.
Just one last thing on that. When you think about the technical and emotional components of a person that Danny looks for in the 51%, right? That someone has to have technical skills and emotional skills. Where do we focus when we're hiring someone? Most people focus on the technical side, right? They look at the resume. Do you have the skills? Do you have the experience? Do you know how to do the job? So getting them to then look at the emotional side and say, if I have 2 comparable candidates, which one am I going to choose? Well, you should be choosing the one with emotional capabilities, even if you have to take a little bit of a hit on the technical side. That's your better bet. Now take that to the next level and say, how am I going to choose who to promote? Well, I'm going to choose the person who's most productive, the person who gets the job done, who has the highest quality. And you're going to expect from them that they're going to keep doing all of that. You're not going to tell them what it means to be a leader. You're not going to focus on the emotional side of it. And so you might have someone who can run a great department and get it all done, but they don't know how to support their team. And no one even told them that was part of the job. So we're always looking at that technical side. And it's a hard habit to break, to get companies to say, I think when we're looking at leadership, we probably need to focus a little bit more on the emotional intelligence than we have been in the past.
And what about the third trap?
That very nice person. Well, I think the best, that takes a lot of coaching. And sometimes it means the person really, you have to ask them if they want to be in a leadership role. A lot of times these people are really community builders and they're the cheerleaders and they rally people and make it feel good to work there. So you want them in a leadership role. You have to get them past that accountability piece. And the one thing that I find works most often is helping that person understand the impact that it has when they don't hold other people accountable, meaning how everyone else on the team feels. So you're avoiding this one person, but you're ignoring the fact that everyone else has to deal with a toxic person. And I had this once on my own team. It sounds crazy when you think about what I do, but I had an employee in my team who I didn't know when I wasn't around was a Jekyll and Hyde personality. And it wasn't until I hired a new person into my marketing team who worked with me for a couple of weeks. And then she came into my office one day and she said, Susan, I just have to say, like, with the things you teach other companies, I can't understand what goes on in that office over there. I said, what are you talking about? And she said, well, this person is like dumping work on other people, not pulling their weight, terrorizing interns. Like,
and you were like, what?
What? I had no idea. And so I called in the other long-term employees, 2 of them who had been with me for a while. And I said, what's going on? And they said, well, they had asked me, they told me about specific problems in the past, but I said, you never told me how bad it is. And they said, well, we thought we should handle it ourselves. We have the tools. We thought we could do this. And I said, yeah, but if I'm not holding that person accountable, it allows it to go on. And it's not your responsibility. I appreciate you trying, but when you can't do it, you have to be willing to come to me. And now I have to tell you, if I let that person go, your work is going to go exponential. Like you are going to have so much more. Well, it turned out that she was giving enough work to them that wasn't really true. But on top of that, just the emotional toll that it took working with that person, they said, bring it. We want more work rather than the work, the emotional work of dealing with this person in the office every day.
I really did like how you brought this home with your story about your daughter's clothing on a Friday night. And you might want to just share the cliff notes of that just to embarrass your daughter one more
Just to
time.
embarrass me a little bit. Oh, she's so
But
used to it. She's like, whatever.
it's picking your battles and knowing why you're doing it and
Yeah.
having the courage to do so is what this story is about.
It is because she was in her fashionista phase, the makeup, the hair, the shoes, the clothes. And when I got home on a Friday night and I could tell she was trying to get out the door before I got in, she was like rushing to get her shoes on and get out the door. And I looked at the outfit and I thought, oh my God, because if I say something to her, I've had a long week. I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to deal with the drama, the tears that come with that. And my worst fear was that she would then just like go into her room, slam the door and stay home. And then I'd have to deal with her all night long. On the other hand, if I don't say something, if I don't pick that battle, you know that you just allowed the line in the sand to move. And if she did it again next week, she'd throw it back in my face. And honestly, if I made that mistake, which many of us do in parenting and in dealing with our employees, if I made that mistake, the most important thing I could do is own it and say, you know what, you're right. I should have said something last week. I hoped it was a fluke, but it wasn't. You're doing it again right now. And I have to tell you that can't happen. So sometimes we're going to make those mistakes of ignoring something intentionally or unintentionally. Sometimes we just get too busy. We're on our way to a meeting, we see something, and then it's 2 days later and you think, oh, it feels stupid to go and tell them now. And so you let it slide. But if you're not staying on all of those behaviors of everything from uniforms would be equivalent to attire, to their attitudes, to the work ethic, to the production deadlines, if you don't stay on top of these things, then what you allowed to happen becomes your new normal. The line in the sand moves. And a very wise person once told me, the behavior you ignore, you condone. And that just rings so true to me. When you're not saying something, you're allowing it to happen. And so with the leader who is too nice to do it, they have to understand that by being nice to that one person, they're really hurting everyone else.
Surprisingly, I even with me having a personality that can be considered pretty aggressive at times. My wife even asked me, she said, I was complimenting my mom. And I said, my mom is just so kind. Like she just has like this kind, like everything about her. She's very high HQ. And my wife said, do you think anyone ever accuses you of being really kind? And she was jabbing me. But, we all want to be liked. None of us necessarily want conflict as leaders, and we're facing so many challenges from the exterior environment, whether they be customers or in our case, investors or our executive teams. I have a level of exhaustion when it comes to confronting conflict that internally I say, well, that's not that big of a deal. I'm going to let that one go. I got to meet John Mackey, I guess it was just over 2 years ago. And I was asking him the Whole Foods story and what his culture was. And I had a nice lunch with him so I could really get him to open up. And he then repeated what he shared with me in private on a podcast. And it was about the word love. And it's a funny word to use when you're also talking about accountability. I think sometimes we can call that tough love. Mm-hmm. But in his case, the way he would start a conversation like that is he would say something like, this is what I love about your potential, Susan. This is where I see you going with your life here at Whole Foods. And this is where I see you in your life more broadly. And I'm in love with your potential. And I'm in love with your potential so much that I want to share with you some of the things that are getting in the way of you reaching where I think you can be. Yeah. And it's a form of love that I'm going to share this feedback with you. And that's really helped me. I can't say I've used it verbatim, but just the mindset of focusing not on someone's current state, but on where they want to go with their lives and helping them get there with the input and feedback has been helpful.
Yeah. Another way to approach that, Ryan, is to ask them if they want to know. If you tell them, I think you have so much potential. I love your potential. I see things that are going to get in your way. And I need to know, do you want to know those things? Because I love your potential enough that I'm willing to be the one to tell you things that maybe others aren't telling you. You have to want to hear it.
followed very quickly by, and what can I do with my own behavior as a leader to get to my
Yes.
potential? That might
Yes.
be
It's
helpful
true.
too.
It's true.
To bring these three, let's just call them kind of core reasons why cultures don't make it, at least from a leadership standpoint, would you tell us the Mets story? Because I think it captures all three of these issues in a really cool story about when you all had a Shake Shack with the Mets. This is an awesome story that you shared with us during your presentation last time.
Well, thank you. When we were first replicating Shake Shacks, I think it was the fourth one went into the Mets City Field, the stadium with Mets play. It would be the first time in the history of the company that we couldn't hire our own employees. And I really, truly believed that one of the core competencies of this organization and of the culture was the ability to bring the right people on board. And so I had spent a fair amount of my early years as the director of culture and learning for the company, articulating those hiring standards and the behaviors and coming up with the interview questions. And when we found out we had to work with this other food service company, the rationale we took was, well, they're going to have great people. Let's just make sure we get them. And so we made a deal with the organization that we could select from their team who would be assigned to us. And also that we could have one of our leaders in each one of the 4 concessions that we were creating, Shake Shack being one of them. And they agreed to all of this. And our team treated it like the opening of a restaurant. Like we went in, we did the interviewing, selected, we did trainings. Danny Meyer spoke to them, did all of the stuff we would normally do. And then on opening day, somebody didn't get the memo because the people who showed up to work with us, we had never seen before. And the ones who we had trained were scattered all over the stadium. And I think there was a fair amount of panic that day. But at the end, what we discovered is that nothing suffered. Culture didn't suffer. The customer experience didn't suffer. And when we dug into why, it was because the 4 managers in those concessions had created so much enthusiasm and passion and made these people feel like they were part of something bigger and it was exciting. And those employees behaved the same as any of our employees. And what it taught us is a lot about bringing out the best in people. You know, when I said earlier, if they have that seed, you can bring out the best in them. And it made us realize that hiring is very important and makes your job easier. If you hire hard, you will manage a lot easier, but it's not the end all and the be all. What's really going to drive your culture is the leadership that you put in there and their ability to hold people accountable to that culture. Build the enthusiasm for it and hold them accountable to it. You know, the 2 bookends on that. There's another organization that does this exceptionally well. It's called Grason Bakery. They are a bakery in Yonkers, New York, and they are the ones who produce the brownies for Ben & Jerry's ice cream. And so
You sent this to us for our holiday gift.
I did. I did send you these brownies because I love the mission of this organization. Grason Bakery is a for-profit bakery that has a not-for-profit foundation associated with it. And the tagline for the company is, we don't hire people to bake brownies. We bake brownies to hire people. They use an open employment model, which means that anyone who wants a job who's eligible to work in the U.S. can sign up to get a job. And they go in order of when you signed up. So next job comes up, Ryan, you get the job. No interview, no background check, no resume, nothing. Just you're the next person on the list. And the reason that they are able to do this is because the culture is so strong and the leadership is so strong that they make people do what happened at Shake Shack. They make them want to be part of the organization. They bring out the best in them, and they're showing them a path forward for people who are otherwise unemployable. You know, we're talking about people who are formerly incarcerated, or they've left so many jobs that nobody wants to hire them anymore. And so they are the unemployable of our society. But Grason is turning them not only into highly capable employees and good employees, but also teaching them leadership and having them grow through the ranks. And so if you Google Grason Bakery and look for their TED Talk, Mike Brady was the former CEO. He did a fantastic TED Talk maybe 7 or 8 years ago that is timeless. And in it, one of the employees who grew up in the company participates in that. And it's a really moving story. But it teaches us a lot about human nature and the fact that we can do so much more for people through our leadership than we even imagine we can do. Because when you are the leader that people want to follow, you will bring out the best in them and they will give their best, not because they have to, but because they want to.
We could just drop the mic right now, but I do want to, because that's such a great parting message, and kind of an illustration of the Met story at scale and even to a more dramatic extent. But I do want to ask this last question, because I think it's in service to founders and executives out there. But this notion of architecture is a big one for Rallyday. We have an architectural division at our firm, and it has to do with building alongside visionaries and providing them with the blueprints to make sure that the business that they're building has durability, that it's beautiful to look at, and most importantly, that it has meaning when you see it or you walk into this business of some kind. And that's kind of a head scratcher for some people. And part of the architectural team's responsibility is to run a program where we first work on purpose with our executive teams and our portfolio companies. And then we talk about strategy, which is table stakes. And then the third module is a couple months, and it's on culture. And, you can imagine, an executive, a founder who's saying, what in the world is a private equity firm going to teach me about culture? So that's one response we get, which I love to get. And I agree with them. Private equity firms have worked very hard to earn their reputation of being terrible with culture, and EBITDA is not a culture, and that's kind of the industry in which I operate. So I actually like that one. The other one, though, is more difficult, and that is our culture is awesome, and I don't want to fiddle with this thing that is so special to me, and I definitely don't want a private equity firm doing that with me. And that's a more difficult conversation, one that I still enjoy because there's so much common ground that we find with the leaders and really about how to scale their culture as their business grows so that they can become better as they get bigger and not worse. And so much common ground that it's not a no-brainer, but very close to it. There's a third response, which is kind of bewilderment around what does it mean to architect a culture, if we use architecture as a verb, because it's kind of ethereal. You got to get to the first place, which is what is culture and what isn't it, and all these kinds of things. In so many words, Susan, how would you define establishing a culture, or when you go into an organization, making it more scalable or making it more powerful? What goes into that, and what would be the first step that someone listening to this podcast could do to start that journey for themselves and for their company?
So when I look at culture and assess the culture of an organization, there are three things that I look for. One is the people factor. It's, do you have the right people in the organization that fit the culture you say you are trying to establish? Do they have that cultural alignment, and are they in the right seats on the bus? Are you holding on to people who should not be there any longer, whether because of your loyalty to them or the inability to address that conflict? So looking at the people factor is the first logical and obvious step, but it's not where I find the most problems. The second thing I would look at is the structure of the company in terms of their processes, their policies, their physical plant, job design, how the organization actually gets work done. And what I often find is that many organizations have a very complicated set of issues around this structural component that they know about, they're aware of it, but they don't realize how big the problem is or what the impact of it is. And I've found myself in a number of very silly situations where I thought, I can't believe this company hired a consultant to come in and talk to them about this. One firm brought me in because they had such a morale issue. And when I interviewed the people in the company, the first thing everyone talked about was the parking problem. I'm like, we're talking about culture here, but they're talking about the parking problem. And they were so obsessed with it that was the leading issue. And so I put a pause on the project and I went back to the leaders and I said, do you know you have a parking problem? And they said, oh, yeah. In fact, we have the blueprints for a garage. We're breaking ground in the spring. I said, why doesn't your team know that? Well, we just haven't gotten around to telling them yet. But that's all they can talk about. Because when people have that kind of a basic need that's not being met, it overrides their ability to latch on to anything else that's going on, unless they have a leader who's going to help them see around it. And so this is a place where the right leadership even if you had no parking solution in the future, just a leader who empathizes with that and says, guys, I understand what a problem this is. We are going to try to address this. We're going to talk to people above us to figure that out. In the meantime, we have to rally together to figure out how we're going to get things done. So leadership can overcome a facilities issue. But when you already have the solution and you're not even getting credit for it because nobody knows it's happening, it's crazy to me. And I've had the same thing with something like a microwave, another organization where it was just because the microwave broke 3 months ago and it was never replaced. And those basic needs, the little things, are so important to people that it can overcome all the good that you're doing in your workplace. And so really understanding what the structural issues are. Technology is another really big one. When the technology doesn't work, people get so frustrated. It ties one arm behind their back and it makes them less productive. And if you've got these great people that you brought in, you've hired the winners in your industry, and then you tie one arm behind their back, you're going to see great people start to sour. They're not going to look so great anymore. And they will either quit or they will stay and be sour. And then you're building a toxic culture. So the structural one is the one that always surprises me because the answers are usually pretty obvious and the leadership just doesn't tap into the importance of those little issues.
And that would be a form of HQ, is for a leader to realize and strive to bring fulfillment and look for,
and to really listen
to those.
To really listen. That when you keep hearing parking is a problem, like you got to tune into that. Don't keep dismissing it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, let's get to a third one, which sort of inventing on the fly here a little bit, or maybe putting words in your mouth. But what I find is the definitions of cultures are usually lacking. And in the sense that a very common answer I get when I talk to a founder who's built a business to say 100, 200 employees is that he or she is very proud that it's still run like a family, that they have a family culture. And then I start saying, well, what does that mean? And, there's a lot of really cool stuff that comes out of that, including the tough love that we talked about, the standards that a family establishes through their actions of the mother and father, typically, or one of them, good, bad, or indifferent. But the cultures always exist. It's not a matter of whether one exists. It does exist. But then, sometimes we'll get into these conversations around, well, it's based on, we're customer centric. We focus on excellence. Kind of these platitudes that if you went to the web and you said, by website, how many have the same core values, quote unquote, they're all the same. And they live in various forms, but they'd be on the website probably. Maybe there's a sign in the headquarters building of some kind.
Right.
But it's not in their performance review, and there's not a prescription or a recipe, as Danny puts it in the book, around how to become excellent at this organization and why it matters to the people that you're serving. How often do you find an ill or incomplete recipe or definitions around what the culture is that prevents it from being able to scale?
I frequently find that the culture that the leadership wants to create or thinks that they've created is pretty far out of line with the culture that is being experienced by team members. And sometimes that's because, unfortunately, a lot of companies create these values. Like you said, they're a dime a dozen, right? Like they're all using the same ones. And it's not really them. It doesn't really strike a chord with them. When I talk about values with people, I start with, like, what would you tell a young person today is the most important thing in life? Things that they should prioritize at work. Like, start there. And if it doesn't really resonate with the leadership, it will never become part of how they operate. And I know you are very big on decision making. And when you incorporate your values into decision making, that is what brings your culture to life the most. That your actions match what you say is most important culturally. When I joined Union Square Hospitality Group after my research, there was an incident at Union Square Cafe where a new manager was hired who every manager gets a line item on the P&L that they're responsible for. And she was put in charge of toilet paper and other paper products, the C-folds, all of that stuff that the restaurant uses. And she was going to prove her worth by saving money on this line item in the P&L by buying crappy toilet paper for the employee bathroom. And the employees were up in arms. They don't care about us anymore. They don't take care of us anymore over toilet paper. And it was a morale issue, like the microwave, like the parking lot. And the crazy thing was that it was a manager's ignorance and not thinking about, if we take care of each other first, I shouldn't be putting crappy toilet paper in the employee bathroom, right? And that became a metaphor for us. In meetings, we would say, okay, are we thinking about the toilet paper here? Are we really thinking about how this decision is going to impact each one of our stakeholders? And if we're living true to the values that we say are most important to us in those decisions. And so I think you're absolutely right that defining that culture, understanding it, having a mission that you really believe in, values that you really believe in, and using them every day in terms of how you manage people, grow people, how you make decisions in the organization, that's when you see a culture at work.
The beliefs and values that you all created, like there's this one that Danny talks about, like putting a salt shaker in the middle of the table.
In the middle of the table.
And like the difference between that and operational excellence is profound. Tell us about how pithy values and beliefs should be so that it translates properly and captures the spiritual intent of the objective.
Yeah, Danny is an amazing storyteller, and he's incredible with analogies. So he's so good at coming up with just the right way to explain something to you that's memorable. Like when he talks about the technical and emotional components of customer service, that you have to get the job done right and you have to make people feel great while you're providing them that service. He talks about you being a swan, because swans work really hard with their little webbed feet to swim across the water, but they look so graceful while they're doing it. And so he would just walk into a restaurant that was in chaos, and the bathroom had flooded, the coat check line was out the door, the kitchen had a fire. He would walk in, he would just say, "Swans, everyone." And in a moment, you knew what you were supposed to be doing. And you got that operational excellence because you had a way of communicating it that everyone understood. So whether you call it pithy or you just call it visual or, emotional in some way, things that connect with people are what they're going to remember. It's really important to understand the behaviors behind a value, but if that becomes an exercise in memorization, it's never going to really resonate with employees. Danny's mission for the restaurants was that they should create rave reviews with every guest that they come in. Like, that's so easy to apply every day. Like, my mission's to create a rave. Okay, something just went wrong. How do I create a rave here? Okay, I'm supposed to provide hospitality and be on the other person's side in this interaction. What does that look like here? And one of the findings in my research for my dissertation was that the reason he was able to create this culture and have a sustainable competitive advantage, not just a competitive advantage in this, but it was sustainable in the industry, was because it was so hard for people to replicate. It was a complex set of behaviors that emanated from a very simple set of rules and analogies and metaphors. And that was what was driving this behavior. And I've talked with other organizations and worked with organizations that have adopted a lot of Danny's sayings and the things from setting the table and had tremendous success with it. One being a theater group here in New York City that I worked with them in 2012, and to this day, they still use the language of Union Square Hospitality Group, and it has really kept their culture alive. So I'm glad you brought it up, because I think the language piece and the way we communicate is such an important piece of this. And writing your values to be cute, pithy, or to stand out in some way is not what's going to do it. It's something that really has to resonate and be memorable for people so that they understand and can hold in their mind the expectation that they need to live up to.
I totally get it. And I think we actually at our firm have too many behaviors. We have 12, which is like, I would fail does the founder know?
Memorization test.
Is her own behavior set. The one that we have the Slack channel, like a lot of companies, and we have what we call our BBO channel, which is beliefs, behaviors, and outcomes, and celebrating the little things, to go back to the title of your book, that really matter. The one that gets played out the most is the simplest one in our belief system, and it might be the Holy Grail. What's the name of the foreign language teaching company?
Oh,
Rosetta
Rosetta
Stone. It
Stone?
may be the Rosetta
Yeah.
Stone for what makes Rallyday so distinguished in the private equity industry. And it's a simple love the work. That's it. Like, love the work. And
Mhm.
we give that one, probably gets more shout outs than any of the other behaviors in our set. Our first two are invest in your heart, mind, and soul. And our second one is take care of each other, surprisingly. And that was before any of us had read the great work that you and Danny did, Susan. Like, in close, there's an interview question that Danny likes to give, allegedly. I either read it or heard it on one of the podcasts, but it goes something like, what is something about you that people have misunderstood or have not
Yes.
interpreted
Yes.
properly? And how would you describe it differently? Would you do that for me, and then also do it on behalf of culture? So, and you can do it in whatever
Sure.
order you want. So this is the Susan
Okay.
question.
Sure.
And then what is it about culture that is misunderstood that if people could get, would unlock greater potential in an organization?
Sure. Sure. So for me personally, when I was asked that question years ago, as we practiced these interview questions that people like Danny like to use, at that time, the thing that was misconstrued about me the most was how serious I was. And it was a turning point for me where I don't think I was even aware of what I saw as this misperception until I said it out loud. And then I thought, I have to change that, right? Because people saw me as being academic in the restaurant industry,
Easy
right? Not
label for the
fun.
PhD. I mean,
It
you
sure
know,
is. It sure is. And that wasn't who I wanted to be. And Richard Careen, who I mentioned earlier, dubbed me Sal. He said, don't be Dr. Salgado, be Sal. And it was one of the greatest gifts that he gave me because it helped me to live out like an alter ego that was really what I wanted people to see. And so that was my misconception. What I would say is something about culture. An easy answer is people think that it's about the beer kegs and the ping pong tables, right? And it's not. But if you dig in deeper than just that simple answer, I think that there is a misconception about how much impact one individual person can have, regardless of where they sit in the organization. Sometimes people will sit and point at leadership and say, well, it's their job to maintain the culture or to make the culture what it's supposed to be. And yet, if you as an individual are not living up to the culture that you're hoping to live in with the values that you have signed on for, you are setting a bad example for everyone around you. And if you're not being held accountable to that, you're part of the problem, right? You can be part of the solution and have not a positional authority to impact culture, but the moral authority to make people want to be part of a better culture by having that infectious enthusiasm and the positive attitude and bringing out the best in others around you, regardless of whether or not you have the role of a leader. And in a bigger company, that's like scraping away at an iceberg with a spoon. And it makes your immediate workplace a whole lot better. At one point in time, I worked with a very large hospital system, but I only worked with one division. And they were so frustrated that they got this culture thing down, but the people around them in other divisions weren't living the same thing. And I gave them the same advice. You can change the culture of an entire organization, one interaction at a time, by being the best version of yourself and representing the culture that you want to see and giving feedback to colleagues in the most friendly way of, why don't you try doing it this way? This is our way. We would say this is the USC way, the Union Square Cafe way of doing things. And it wasn't about me telling you you're wrong or you're bad, but rather, that's not how we do things here. This is the USC way.
yeah, I
And
love you share that on one of your YouTube videos, and it's a story of the transport department at the orthopedic practice, and
yeah,
how, I think his name was Justin or something along those lines, would call down to get transport, and and he
yep,
did so in a way that always commanded, in the
yep,
kindest way, performance that no one else got, and the doctors couldn't even
yes,
get the love out of that department. So that's a great way for us to leave it. We call it leading your 20 square feet, which is like it's a arbitrary amount of space, but one that we often live in, and
I love
you
that.
can do that anywhere in
Yeah,
companies
I
where
love
we
that.
work.
Yep. It powers within each one of us.
Um,
Imagine what a great place it would be to work if everyone brought their best self to work every
well,
day.
thanks for bringing Sal today. Can I call you Sal now going forward, or is that too close?
Sure. Yep. Nope. I love it.
I'm going to think through what I should call myself. So I'm more like my mom. Um, and all I can tell you is that this has been awesome. Thank you for your time, and thank you for something that I think is bigger, which is just the contribution to building better organizations and better communities and better places to work through culture and your thought leadership. And for any of you out there, Sal is all over the web. And what is the name of your consulting practice, Susan?
It's Grason Consulting.
Okay. And I'm assuming that's a website and all that stuff.
It's actually SusanSalgado.com. Kept it
Perfect.
easier.
Well, again, thank you for that. Anything we missed that you wanted to share with our listeners before we sign off?
I can think of a million things that we missed, a million little things. And I think there's so much opportunity for each of us to think about how those little things that we do every day can help to impact culture in positive ways and impact the people around us in positive ways. And I'm really grateful to have had this opportunity to talk to you about that, Ryan. Your PE firm is so unique because of your emphasis on culture. I have pitched this to PE firms before, like, we could do something to support your portfolio companies. And it's a hard sell. So I have the greatest admiration for you and your partners at Rallyday and your entire team for really putting the resources behind this that are required to help organizations build a strong and positive, uplifting culture.
Thank you. It's because we love the work.
I love it.
Well, thanks, Sal. This has been awesome.
Thank
and
you.
I wish you a great rest of your new year.
Thank you.
All
You
right.
too. Take care, Ryan.